My name is Adam Lisbon, and I am the Japanese and Korean Studies librarian at the University of Colorado Boulder. So my department is actually the university libraries, and my country of specialty by background is Japan, but I also help with Korean studies as well. And by proxy, I also help with library science and mentoring students who may have an interest in East Asian studies librarianship. The sort of very beginning of that story is when I was 4. I watched Big Bird Goes to Japan 1,000 times as a kid. I think it was a series of things. I grew up not actually traveling a lot, and at the time in the 80s, early 90s, Japan was one of the only non-Western countries that had any sort of international media presence. But I did enjoy languages, and I majored in Japanese in undergrad. And when I studied abroad in Japan, it was this life-changing experience for me. And then I did JET programs. I taught English in Japan for 3 years on JET. And when I came back home, I had actually volunteered as a librarian in Japan. I had this life policy of always saying yes to things within reason. And so I ended up doing that for a bit. And eventually I found my way to graduate school doing a master's in library science and was able to marry the background in Japan and Japanese with being a librarian. So for me, the focus of my research is more on the library side. So I think a lot about issues related to how Chinese, Japanese, and Korean materials are represented in American institutions and what sort of logistical challenges come up from that. So for example, I speak Japanese, and I'm the only person in the library that speaks Japanese. And so when I hand off materials requests, I'm handing off to colleagues that don't speak, read, or write Japanese at all. So how do we facilitate efficient workflows that create fewer errors, that require less back and forth and things like that? It's actually not really well explored, and I'm really interested in figuring out ways to automate workflows, to empower that kind of collection development, even if the language skills aren't entirely there. And I also do a lot of work with onboarding, which has to do with onboarding is about actually developing your skill set so you're a really productive person as quickly as possible in your new work environment. And I think that became interesting for me because in my case, because I'm so specialized in the work I do, it was actually really difficult for my supervisors to supervise me because I was the only one that could read the materials. So that made it really hard to sort of get embedded into my work initially, and I got really interested in how to break down those barriers. And so especially in the academic library context, but I think it applies to a lot of librarians who focus on geographic regions and languages, and sort of their work exists in a non-Western context almost, even though you're working inside of an American institution. So I will admit, I actually do spend a fair bit of time in front of my computer, at least when I'm doing research related to coding and automation. When I've done research that involves a lot of communication with people, so you're doing interviews and focus groups, that's actually a lot of fun because you just kind of learn a lot about people and their concerns. One of my research papers, I actually interviewed colleagues here at the library, and we talked a lot about what their experience was like starting at the libraries and how supported they felt, and this was my research on onboarding. So it was really neat learning about everyone's different experiences, and what came out of that was I actually founded a committee to create onboarding materials for my coworkers here, and that's a standard part of how we hire people now. Part of research is you don't just write a paper, you also get to do presentations. And so we were presenting to our colleagues. We were going to national conferences, state conferences, and just chatting with people and hanging out, doing roundtables. And yeah, you just get to meet all these people and chat. And especially when you're doing presentations, you get a lot of feedback from people about new ideas and different approaches. So librarians are a little different. We do teach, but we often teach in other people's classes. And there's different approaches to that. We spend a lot of time talking about the authority of different sources and how to use them and put them together, and why you need a diverse set of sources to create a good research project. And sort of teaching students to be their own, I always like to say that they are the judge, jury, and executioner of the sources they're using to do research. I think one of the things students don't realize is that when professors are publishing, we're going through the same experience, and our work gets put through the ringer as well. I always like to take out a manuscript of one of my articles and show them all of the red and cross-outs on it that other reviewers have given me. Not that this is terrible, but there's a lot of questions, concerns, comments, and I have to respond to all of that, and I end up with a much better paper in the end for sure. You always have other people double check your work because you will always have a much better product as a result. And so really learning to be humble and not so insecure about letting other people look at your work is really, really important because you'll always get a better product at the end of it. I think every paper I've ever written, there's always been a point in the middle of it where I'm like, this is a terrible paper. Why am I doing this? This is the worst idea ever. That never goes away, and you're always improving your writing. I'm 35. I'm working on my 5th publication, and I'm still like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And I know I'm going to need people to look it over, and they're going to point out obvious flaws that I didn't catch. It's just it's a natural part of the process. I think it's important for undergrads to know how to do research because, of course, not all students are going to become professors, but whatever job you do, there's almost always some component of analysis and research in some way. And if you're talking with a potential employer about how you're going to accomplish things and your answer is, I'm going to Google it, would you put your job on the line for subpar information that you just got off of Google? There's other ways to discover that, and learning to do research in whatever discipline it is you're working in really teaches you how to have this critical eye to dig deeper and do better and in essence produce good work no matter what type of work that is. I think students often sort of choose more generic, boring topics when they should really be focusing in on those more exciting things they want to do. Because if you don't have the passion behind it, of course you don't want to invest, a couple of nights in, and of course you're going to do it last minute if you can't find that level of engagement that you need. That's what's really important about research. I guess the one parting thing I would say is that since I'm actually a librarian and not just a normal professor, if you will, I think it's really funny because libraries have managed to adapt and change, but stereotypes about us haven't changed much. I think that modern libraries are filled with very sociable people who really want to engage. And it's really fun working with students and hearing what they want to do. And what I always hear from students is, I'm always so worried about bothering people or interrupting. And I think that stereotype of the shushy librarian really creates that barrier. And I have to say, quite frankly, it's the opposite. I've been told by students in the library to be quiet because I'm too loud and talkative. So I really hope that if students can take away anything, it's that the library is a really open and welcoming place, and that they should feel really comfortable seeking us out and know that that's actually one of the more exciting and fun parts of my job. It's not something that's in the way.